Commander Jack Murphy stared at the view screen with the detached interest of someone watching paint dry. Not that he'd ever watched paint dry. He had people for that. Well, not specifically for paint watching, but the metaphor worked better that way. So those are the infamous Vrix, he said, taking a sip from his coffee mug emblazoned with the phrase "Diplomacy is just war with better coffee." They look like angry vacuum cleaners with delusions of grandeur. The Vrix fleet had arrived 12 hours ago, positioning themselves in a perfect geometric formation around Earth's orbital defense grid. 300 ships, each the size of Manhattan, their hulls resembling obsidian knives cutting through the blackness of space. General Liu, commander of Earth's combined defense forces, shot Murphy an exasperated look. "Commander Murphy, this is hardly the time for your unique brand of observation. The Vrix have systematically conquered 17 systems in the past decade. Their technological superiority is undeniable. Yes, but their fashion sense is questionable. Did you see their commander? All those spikes? Compensating much?" Murphy set down his mug and adjusted his rumpled uniform. At 52, Jack Murphy was the most decorated diplomatic officer in Earth's Space Corps, despite, or perhaps because of his unorthodox methods. His salt and pepper hair was perpetually disheveled, and his uniform always looked like he'd slept in it, which he often did. "Their ultimatum expires in exactly 12 hours, General Liu reminded him. Either Earth surrenders unconditionally, or they'll begin what they call systematic population reduction." "Fancy term for genocide," Murphy muttered, studying the tactical display. "And they've positioned themselves just outside our defense grid's effective range. Clever vacuum cleaners." The orbital command center buzzed with frantic activity. Analysts ran simulations, communications officers monitored channels, and military personnel prepared for what seemed like an inevitable conflict. Earth had known about alien life for decades, had even established diplomatic relations with several species, but the Vrix were different. They didn't negotiate, they conquered. "Any response from the coalition?" Murphy asked, referring to Earth's allies in the Galactic community. Liu shook her head. "They're sending representatives, but they won't arrive for at least 3 days. By then we might be discussing our surrender terms over some lovely Vrix cuisine." "Do they even have cuisine? Or do they just absorb nutrients through their exoskeletons?" Murphy tapped his fingers against the console. "Have they communicated anything else since the ultimatum?" "Nothing. Complete silence." The main view screen showed the Vrix command ship, a massive vessel shaped like a serrated blade. Murphy stared at it, his seemingly casual demeanor masking the rapid calculations happening behind his eyes. "We need to convene the Security Council," Liu said. "President Okafor has called an emergency session in 30 minutes. "Fantastic. Another meeting where everyone talks and no one listens." Murphy stood up, stretching his back. Although watching politicians panic is slightly more entertaining than watching paint dry. Slightly. As Murphy headed for the door, Lieutenant Nia Rodriguez fell into step beside him. At 35, Rodriguez was Murphy's right-hand, brilliant tactician, and the only person who could tolerate his peculiar methods for extended periods. "You have that look, Commander," she said, her dark eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What look?" "Look. The one that means you're about to do something that will either save us all or get us court-martialed. Possibly both." Murphy grinned. "Lieutenant, when have I ever gotten us court-martialed?" "The Proxima incident. The Titan Conference. The diplomatic disaster on Europa. Need I continue?" "Those were all diplomatic victories eventually." "After they initially went horrifically wrong," Rodriguez countered. Details. Murphy's expression suddenly turned serious. "Did we get that cultural database from the Andromeda Exchange?" "The Vrix cultural files?" "Yes, but they're incomplete. The Vrix aren't exactly forthcoming about their society. Get me everything we have. And I mean everything. Even the stuff classified as probably useless trivia." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "You think the answer is in their culture?" "Lieutenant, In my 27 years of dealing with species who want to kill us, I've learned one universal truth. Everyone has a boogeyman hiding in their cultural closet. Murphy's eyes gleamed with a dangerous intelligence. We just need to find the Vrix's boogeyman and invite it to the party. The Emergency Security Council meeting was everything Murphy had predicted: loud, chaotic, and monumentally unhelpful. President Okafor, a tall woman with close-cropped gray hair and the patience of a saint, tried to maintain order as various officials shouted over each other. The Oval Chamber, designed for dignified discussion, now resembled a marketplace during a flash sale. "We should launch a preemptive strike," bellowed Admiral Tom Washington, the grizzled head of the Space Navy. With his perpetual scowl and buzz cut, Washington looked like he'd been carved from granite by an artist who only knew how to depict angry. "With what? Harsh language?" Defense Minister Choi responded. "Their shields can withstand 10 times the firepower of our largest weapons." "Perhaps we should consider their terms," suggested Ambassador Patel, flinching when Washington turned his scowl toward her. "Surrender? After what they did to the Centauri colonies? They reduced the population by 90% even after they surrendered." Murphy sat in the back of the room with Rodriguez, watching the chaos with detached amusement. 10 credits says Washington threatens to punch someone in the next 5 minutes, he whispered. Rodriguez rolled her eyes. "I don't take sucker bets." As if on cue, Washington slammed his fist on the table. "If anyone suggests surrender again, I'll personally rearrange their face." "See?" Rodriguez muttered. Murphy leaned back in his chair, studying the assembled leaders of Earth. Politicians, military officers, scientists, and diplomats, all experts in their fields, all completely out of their depth. His gaze drifted to the large display showing the Vrix fleet, still in perfect formation. President Okafor finally managed to restore some semblance of order. "People, please. We have less than 10 hours before the ultimatum expires. We need solutions, not arguments." "Madam President," began Dr. Alvarez, head of the Xenobiology Department, "our analysis of previous Vrix conquests shows a pattern. They always issue this exact ultimatum. 12 hours, then they attack." "So they're consistent," Washington growled, "consistently murderous." "But why 12 hours? Murphy suddenly spoke up, causing heads to turn. He rarely contributed in these meetings, preferring to observe and then do whatever he wanted anyway. "What does it matter?" someone asked. "Everything matters when you're trying to understand an enemy," Murphy replied, standing up. 12 is a significant number in many cultures. It could have religious importance, military significance, or maybe they just need 12 hours to prepare their weapons. Or maybe, Washington said sarcastically, they enjoy giving their victims time to panic. Possibly. Fear is an effective weapon. Murphy walked to the center of the room. But the Vrix don't seem like the type to care about psychological warfare. They're too efficient. President Okafor studied Murphy with interest. "Do you have something to contribute, Commander?" "Just thinking out loud, Madam President. The Vrix have conquered 17 systems, always with the same pattern. Arrive, issue the 12-hour ultimatum, then attack if demands aren't met." "And your point is?" "My point is, 17 victories make for a confident enemy." "Maybe too confident." Murphy turned to Rodriguez. "Lieutenant, what's the status on those cultural files?" Rodriguez checked her tablet. "Downloaded and ready, sir." "Excellent." Murphy turned back to the President. "Madam President, I'd like permission to pursue an alternative approach." Washington scoffed. "Let me guess, another one of your unorthodox diplomatic solutions? Like when you challenged the Rigelian ambassador to a drinking contest. That worked, didn't it? You set fire to his ceremonial headdress." "An unexpected development that led to mutual respect," Murphy countered. "Sometimes you have to burn a few bridges to build new ones, or burn a few headdresses. The metaphor's flexible." President Okafor held up a hand to silence them. "What exactly are you proposing, Commander?" I need time to study the Vrix cultural database. There might be something there we can use. Study? We don't have time for an anthropological research project. Washington exploded. We need to prepare our defenses, evacuate civilians, ready our fleet. All excellent suggestions which I'm sure you're already implementing, Murphy interrupted smoothly. I'm merely offering to explore another avenue. What's the harm in that? The president considered for a moment. You have 4 hours, Commander. After that, I need you back here with either a viable solution or ready to implement whatever plan we decide on. Understood, Madam President. Murphy gave a casual salute and headed for the door, Rodriguez following close behind. As they left the chamber, Rodriguez whispered, 4 hours isn't much time. More than enough to find a boogeyman, Lieutenant. More than enough. 3 hours into Murphy's allotted research time, the Emergency Council reconvened to finalize Earth's response to the Vrix ultimatum. There was just one problem. Where the hell is Murphy? Washington demanded, his scowl somehow even more pronounced than usual. Rodriguez stood at attention, internally cursing her boss's tendency to disappear at critical moments. I'm not certain, Admiral. He was reviewing the cultural database and then said he needed to check something. Check what? The inside of a whiskey bottle? Washington's face had achieved a shade of red previously unknown to science. President Okafor sighed. Lieutenant, please locate Commander Murphy immediately. We have less than 5 hours remaining. Yes, Madam President. Rodriguez hurried from the chamber, muttering curses under her breath. This was typical Murphy behavior: vanish when needed most, then reappear with either a brilliant solution or a catastrophic idea that somehow worked out anyway. After checking Murphy's quarters, the mess hall, and even the observatory, a favorite thinking spot of his, Rodriguez finally found him in the communication center, surrounded by displays and muttering to himself. Commander, the Security Council is waiting for you. Rodriguez tried to keep the exasperation from her voice. Admiral Washington is approximately 30 seconds away from having an aneurysm. That would solve one problem. At least, Murphy replied absently, his eyes never leaving the displays. Look at this, Rodriguez. She glanced at the screen showing Vrix cultural symbols and text. What am I looking at exactly? The Vrix have conquered 17 systems, right? But they've encountered 32 spacefaring species. Why didn't they attack the other 15? Rodriguez frowned. Different strategic value? Defensive capabilities? Alliances? That's what I thought initially. But then I noticed something. Murphy pointed to a section of text. The Vrix have a surprisingly complex religious system. They worship entities they call the Shapers of Void, basically cosmic horror gods who exist in the spaces between stars. Fascinating. But how does this help us not get invaded? And Rodriguez checked her watch. 4 hours and 43 minutes. Murphy grinned, the kind of grin that made Rodriguez want to preemptively file for hazard pay. Did you know that in Vrix mythology, there's a specific invocation that's forbidden? They believe that certain phrases, when spoken, can summon these entities. You want to, what? Pretend to summon their gods? Not pretend, Lieutenant. The Vrix truly believe that specific words, spoken in specific ways, have power. Murphy pulled up another display. And look at this. Every species the Vrix didn't conquer had one thing in common. They had religious practices that the Vrix considered potentially dangerous. Dangerous how? Dangerous as in might accidentally summon universe-eating horrors. Dangerous. Murphy's eyes gleamed with mischief. Now, what if we were to broadcast a message that, to Vrix sensibilities, sounds exactly like someone about to tear open the fabric of reality? Rodriguez stared at her commander. That's your plan? Scare them with their own superstitions? Technically, it's threatening them with cosmic horror gods, but yes, that's the general idea. Sir, with all due respect, that's completely brilliant. I know. Murphy stood up, gathering his notes. Come on, we need to get back to the council. They're going to think you've lost your mind. Wouldn't be the first time. Murphy paused at the door. Lieutenant, do you know why I've survived 27 years in diplomatic service? Your inexplicable luck? Because I understand that all sentient species, no matter how advanced, have fears rooted deep in their psyche. The more logical and militaristic they appear, the more likely they're suppressing something primal. He tapped the display showing the Vrix fleet. Those ships out there? They're piloted by beings who've been raised since birth to fear certain words. Words we're about to use against them. Rodriguez shook her head but followed him out. I hope you're right, sir. Because if you're wrong. If I'm wrong, we'll still have the satisfaction of confusing the hell out of them before they blow us to smithereens. Murphy grinned. And really, isn't that what diplomacy is all about? When they returned to the council chamber, Murphy's explanation of his plan went exactly as Rodriguez had predicted. You want to do what? Washington roared, his face achieving new heights of redness. Psychological warfare, Murphy replied calmly, using their own cultural fears against them. This isn't some primitive tribe we can scare with ghost stories. Washington turned to President Okafor. Madam President, this is absurd. The president looked skeptical, but gestured for Murphy to continue. Explain exactly what you're proposing, Commander. We broadcast a specific message, formatted in a way that will trigger their religious fears. Based on the cultural database, the Vrix believe that certain phrases, spoken in certain cadences, can tear the barrier between our universe and whatever hell dimension their gods inhabit. And you think they'll just run away? Dr. Alvarez asked incredulously. If they truly believe it? Yes. Murphy displayed his research on the main screen. Look at the species they've avoided conquering. All had practices that aligned with the Vrix taboos. The room fell silent as the council members digested this information. Even if there's a small chance it works, Murphy added, what do we have to lose? Our dignity? Someone muttered. I'd rather keep our dignity and lose our planet, Washington growled. President Okafor studied the data, then looked at Murphy. What exactly is this message you want to broadcast? Murphy smiled. That's the beautiful part. We need to be silent for almost the entire 12 hours, then deliver a single phrase just before the deadline expires. Silence. Washington looked incredulous. That's part of your plan? Silence. Then a whisper that will make them run. Murphy looked around the room. So, what's it going to be? Conventional defense that we know will fail, or my admittedly unusual but potentially effective alternative? The council members exchanged glances. Finally, President Okafor spoke. We'll try it your way, Commander. But we'll also continue preparations for defense, just in case your whisper doesn't have the desired effect. Murphy nodded. Fair enough. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare our message of cosmic terror. As they left the chamber, Rodriguez muttered, I can't believe they agreed to this. Desperation makes for strange bedfellows, Lieutenant. Murphy checked his watch. 4 hours until showtime. Let's go practice some eldritch whispering. With 10 minutes remaining before the Vrix ultimatum expired, the orbital command center was eerily quiet. Military personnel stood at their stations, weapons systems were primed, and evacuation protocols were ready to implement. Earth's meager defensive fleet had positioned itself in a last-stand formation, prepared for a battle they couldn't possibly win. At the communications station, Murphy sat casually, feet propped up on the console, eating an apple. Commander, perhaps a little more decorum? General Liu suggested tightly. Decorum won't save us if this fails, Murphy replied, taking another bite. Besides, I think better when I'm snacking. Rodriguez stood nearby, monitoring the communications array they had modified according to Murphy's specifications. For the past 11 hours and 50 minutes, Earth had maintained complete radio silence toward the Vrix fleet, ignoring their increasingly frequent demands for a response. 2 minutes remaining, an officer announced. Washington approached Murphy, his expression grave. I still think this is insane. Most of my best ideas start that way, Murphy said cheerfully. Remember the Tau Ceti incident? You mooned their High Chancellor and prevented a war. Murphy checked the time. 1:30. Are we ready, Lieutenant? Rodriguez nodded. Broadcasting system modified as specified. It will transmit on all Vrix frequencies simultaneously. Excellent. Murphy stood up, brushing apple crumbs from his rumpled uniform. Now comes the fun part. President Okafor's face appeared on a side screen. Commander, are you certain about this? Absolutely not, Madam President. But uncertainty makes life interesting. Murphy positioned himself in front of the communications array. 30 seconds. The command center fell silent. On the view screen, the Vrix fleet remained in perfect formation, weapons visibly charged and ready. 10 seconds, Rodriguez announced. Murphy took a deep breath, then leaned toward the microphone. At precisely the moment the ultimatum expired, he whispered a phrase in what sounded like a combination of clicks, hisses, and guttural sounds, delivered in a specific cadence that made several humans in the room shiver involuntarily. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then chaos erupted. The Vrix fleet's perfect formation disintegrated. Ships began emergency maneuvers, some nearly colliding with each other. Their communication channels, which Earth's intelligence had been monitoring, exploded with frantic chatter. What the hell? Washington stared at the screen. What did you say to them? Murphy grinned. Roughly translated? The void between stars hears your thoughts and finds them delicious. That's it? Washington looked incredulous. It's not the words themselves, Admiral. It's how they were delivered. In Vrix mythology, that specific cadence of sounds is believed to create a tier in reality through which their cosmic horror gods can enter our universe. On the screen, the Vrix fleet continued its chaotic movements. Several smaller vessels had already jumped to faster-than-light travel, disappearing from sensors. They're running away? General Liu said, disbelief evident in her voice. Not all of them. Yet. Murphy turned to Rodriguez. Time for Phase 2. Rodriguez nodded and activated a pre-recorded message. Murphy's whispered phrase began broadcasting again, this time with subtle variations in tone and rhythm. The effect on the remaining Vrix ships was immediate. Their formation completely collapsed as vessels scrambled to escape. My God, President Okafor whispered from the screen. It's actually working. Washington shook his head in amazement. They're retreating because of a ghost story? One species' ghost story is another species' deeply held religious terror, Murphy replied, watching as more Vrix ships disappeared into FTL. Fear is universal, Admiral. Even vacuum cleaners with delusions of grandeur can be afraid of the dark. Within minutes, only the Vrix command ship remained. It hung in space for several long moments, as if in defiance. Then, without warning, it too vanished into FTL. The command center erupted in cheers. Officers hugged each other, some laughing, others crying with relief. President Okafor smiled broadly from the screen. Commander Murphy, it appears your unorthodox approach has saved Earth from invasion. Murphy gave a casual salute. Just doing my job, Madam President. Scaring the pants off aliens who don't wear pants. As the celebration continued around them, Rodriguez approached Murphy. Sir, how did you know it would work? What if they hadn't believed their own superstitions? Murphy's expression turned thoughtful. The more technologically advanced a society becomes, the more it tries to distance itself from its primal fears. But those fears never really go away. They just get buried deeper. He glanced at the now empty view screen. The Vrix built their empire on logic and military might, but at their core, they're still afraid of the dark, just like us. Rodriguez nodded slowly. So what happens when they realize we tricked them? Murphy's smile returned. That, Lieutenant, is a problem for tomorrow's diplomatic crisis. For now, let's enjoy the fact that we saved Earth with a whisper. 3 days after what was already being called the Whisper Incident, Murphy found himself in a debriefing room with Rodriguez, Washington, and a team of intelligence analysts. The wall displays showed the track paths of the Vrix fleet as they continued their hasty retreat from Earth space. "They're not just withdrawing," an analyst reported. "They're in full retreat across all fronts. Reports from the coalition indicate they're pulling back from recently conquered territories as well." Washington shook his head in disbelief. All because of some mumbo-jumbo whispered by this rumpled excuse for a diplomat. "Your rumpled excuse for a diplomat," Murphy corrected cheerfully. "Though I prefer unconventional savior of humanity, if you're taking suggestions." Rodriguez studied the data. "Sir, the coalition is requesting details of the weapon we used against the Vrix. What should we tell them?" "The truth, of course," Murphy replied. "We terrified them with their own boogeyman." Washington snorted. "And when the Vrix realized they were tricked? When they come back with even more ships and a lot less patience? Cross that bridge when we come to it." Murphy leaned back in his chair. "Besides, they can't come back." "What do you mean?" Murphy gestured to the cultural database displayed on a side screen. "According to Vrix belief, once a site has been corrupted by the invocation I used, it remains tainted for at least 73 years. They literally can't return without risking the wrath of their cosmic horror gods." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. 73 years of safety," Washington murmured, "because they believe in monsters under the bed." "Essentially, yes." Murphy pulled up another display. "And here's the really interesting part. The Vrix have already announced to their allies that Earth is now anathema, forbidden territory. They're spreading the word that we've somehow become aligned with these entities they fear." Rodriguez frowned. "Won't that just make other species afraid to contact us?" "Some, perhaps. But fear creates respect." Murphy grinned. "And I'd rather be the species that other species are slightly afraid of than the species that got conquered because they weren't scary enough." "So that's it?" Washington asked. "We scared them away with a bedtime story?" "A very specific bedtime story, delivered in a very specific way." Murphy stood up and walked to the main display, pointing to symbols from the Vrix cultural database. "These represent their shapers of void, the entities they believe exist in the darkness between stars. Notice anything familiar about them?" The analyst leaned forward, studying the abstract, unsettling shapes. "They look almost like," one began. "Like cephalopods," Murphy finished. "Tentacled beings that move through darkness. Remind you of anything from human mythology?" "Cthulhu," Rodriguez said suddenly. "Lovecraft's cosmic horrors." "Exactly. It seems humans and Vrix share a primal fear, tentacled monstrosities lurking in dark places." Murphy tapped the screen. "The difference is, we turned our fears into entertainment. They built a religion around theirs." Washington shook his head. "So humanity's advantage is that we made movies about our nightmares instead of worshipping them." "In a manner of speaking." Murphy returned to his seat. "The real advantage is that we understand fear as a tool. The Vrix try to inspire fear through military might. We just proved we can inspire greater fear through cultural understanding." "And what happens when they figure that out?" Washington pressed. Murphy's expression turned thoughtful. "Then we'll have to be ready with a new boogeyman. Or perhaps by then we'll have figured out how to talk to each other without resorting to fear at all." He looked around the room. "Though I wouldn't bet on it." As the meeting concluded, Rodriguez accompanied Murphy into the corridor. "Sir, there's something I don't understand. How did you know that specific cadence would trigger their fear response?" Murphy smiled enigmatically. "Let's just say I have an ear for these things." "No, seriously." He sighed. The database contained recordings of prohibited religious ceremonies. "I noticed patterns in what was labeled as dangerous invocations and crafted our message to mimic those patterns while incorporating specific mythological references." "So you essentially created a custom-made nightmare for an entire species." "I prefer to think of it as culturally informed psychological deterrence," Murphy replied. Sounds better on my performance review. Rodriguez shook her head, a reluctant smile forming. You know they're calling you the Whisperer now? Could be worse. They could be calling me that guy who got us all killed. Murphy checked his watch. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a date with a bottle of very expensive scotch that Admiral Washington doesn't know I borrowed from his personal collection. Celebrating your victory? No, Lieutenant. Preparing for the next crisis. Murphy's eyes twinkled. Because if there's one thing I've learned in 27 years of diplomacy, it's that the universe is never short on species who want to kill us. 2 weeks after the Vrix retreat, Earth had settled into an uneasy peace. The planet celebrated its unexpected salvation while military and political leaders debated what to do with their newfound reputation as the species that scared away the unbeatable Vrix. Murphy, much to his dismay, had become something of a celebrity. His face appeared on news broadcasts, memes, and even T-shirts bearing the slogan, "Sometimes a whisper is louder than a scream." I hate all of this, he grumbled to Rodriguez as they walked through the corridors of the United Earth Government headquarters. I can't even get a coffee without someone asking me to whisper at them. The price of fame, Rodriguez replied unsympathetically. At least the inquiry cleared you of any wrongdoing. Only because it worked. If it hadn't, I'd be court-martialed for endangering Earth based on an anthropological hunch. They entered a conference room where Admiral Washington waited, looking as perpetually disgruntled as ever. Murphy, he acknowledged with a nod that might have been respectful. It was hard to tell with Washington. Admiral, Murphy replied, dropping into a chair. I assume this isn't a social call. Hardly. Washington activated the room's privacy field. We've received a communication from the coalition. The Vrix have filed a formal complaint. Murphy raised an eyebrow. They're complaining that we didn't let them invade us properly? That's rich. They're claiming we violated galactic law by using prohibited psychological warfare tactics, Washington continued, ignoring the interruption. Specifically, they're accusing us of deliberately exploiting cultural vulnerabilities. Which is exactly what we did, Rodriguez pointed out. Yes, but they're not supposed to admit their cultural vulnerability is a fear of tentacle monsters, Murphy said. That rather undermines their whole terrifying conqueror brand, doesn't it? Washington's scowl deepened. This isn't a joke, Murphy. They're demanding reparations and a formal apology. Or what? They'll come back? We all know they can't do that without violating their own religious taboos. Murphy leaned forward. Besides, how exactly do they plan to prove we deliberately targeted their superstitions? As far as anyone knows, I just made random spooky noises at them. That's actually why I called you here. Washington looked uncomfortable. The coalition is sending representatives to investigate the incident. They'll arrive tomorrow. Murphy's eyes narrowed. And you want me to convince them that I didn't deliberately exploit Vrix's religious fears? Essentially, yes. So you want me to lie? I want you to be selective with the truth, Washington corrected. For Earth's sake. Murphy considered this for a moment, then slowly smiled. Actually, I have a better idea. The next day, Murphy stood in the diplomatic reception area alongside President Okafor, Washington, and various other officials. The coalition delegation consisted of representatives from 7 species, including a Medusan floating in a containment field and a Proximan with their characteristic crystalline exoskeleton. On behalf of Earth, I welcome you, President Okafor began. We understand you're here to investigate the recent incident with the Vrix fleet. The lead representative, a tall insectoid being called Ambassador TZK, stepped forward. Indeed, the Vrix hegemony has filed serious accusations against Earth regarding prohibited warfare tactics. Yes, we've heard, Murphy interjected. They claim we deliberately exploited their cultural fears. TZK Kike's antennae twitched. Precisely. Such actions, if proven, would violate Section 17 of the Galactic Cooperation Treaty. A treaty Earth isn't even a signatory to, Washington muttered under his breath. Murphy stepped forward. Ambassador, with all due respect, the Vrix were about to invade our planet. They had already conquered 17 systems. What exactly were we supposed to do? The method of defense is the issue, Tzkk replied. Cultural exploitation. Was completely accidental, Murphy interrupted smoothly. You see, what the Vrix heard as a forbidden religious invocation was actually a standard human greeting. The coalition representatives exchanged glances. Explain, demanded the Medusan. Murphy adopted an expression of innocent confusion. We humans have many ways of greeting new species. The phrase I used translates roughly to "may peace find you in the darkness between stars." It's a poetic expression of goodwill. That is not how the Vrix interpreted it, Tzkk said. Evidently not. But that's hardly our fault, is it? Murphy spread his hands. If they mistook our greeting for some kind of threat, that's a failure of cross-cultural understanding, not psychological warfare. Rodriguez, standing nearby, managed to keep a straight face, though it clearly required effort. Are you claiming, the Proximan representative asked slowly, that the Vrix fled in terror because they misunderstood a greeting? Exactly. Murphy's expression brightened. In fact, we were quite confused by their reaction. We've been studying their retreat patterns to understand what went wrong. The coalition representatives conferred quietly among themselves. Finally, Tzk turned back to Murphy. Commander, your explanation seems convenient. Life often is convenient when you're not trying to conquer other species, Murphy replied cheerfully. Perhaps the Vrix should try it sometime. After several more hours of discussion, the coalition delegation departed, leaving the Earth officials in the reception area. They didn't believe a word of it, Washington said flatly. Of course not, Murphy agreed. But they can't prove otherwise, and more importantly, they don't want to. President Okafor looked curious. What do you mean? Think about it. The Vrix have been the bullies of the Galactic playground for decades. No one likes them, but everyone fears them. Murphy grinned. And now they've run away from Earth because they were scared of a whisper. The coalition species are delighted by their humiliation. So they'll drop the investigation? Rodriguez asked. They'll file a report saying there's insufficient evidence of treaty violations, and privately, they'll be sending us thank you notes. Murphy straightened his perpetually rumpled uniform. Meanwhile, the Vrix are stuck. They can't admit they fled because of superstitious fear, and they can't return to Earth without violating their own religious taboos. Washington shook his head slowly. All because you whispered the alien equivalent of boogeyman at them. The universe is a strange place, Admiral. Murphy's expression turned thoughtful. You know what the real irony is? The Vrix saw humans as weak because we're chaotic, emotional, and unpredictable. But those are exactly the qualities that saved us. How so? President Okafor asked. The Vrix are logical, orderly, and rigid. They conquered through superior technology and strict military doctrine. But they never considered that their rigid cultural fears could be used against them. Murphy smiled. Humans, on the other hand, embrace our contradictions. We make entertainment out of our nightmares. We joke about our fears. That adaptability is our strength. So humanity's greatest asset is our messiness? Rodriguez asked. Precisely. Murphy looked around at the assembled officials. The Vrix couldn't comprehend a species that would weaponize a whisper. They couldn't predict what we'd do because we're gloriously, chaotically human. And that unpredictability terrifies them more than any weapon could. President Okafor nodded slowly. So where do we go from here? That's the million-credit question, Murphy replied. The galaxy now knows us as the species that scared away the Vrix. Some will fear us. Others will want to ally with us. All of them will be watching to see what we do next. And what should we do next? Washington asked, his typical gruffness softened by genuine curiosity. Murphy stared out the window at the Earth spinning peacefully below. We do what humans have always done: adapt, explore, and try not to make too many enemies along the way. Rodriguez laughed. With you as our diplomat? We'll be at war with half the galaxy by next Tuesday. Perhaps, Murphy conceded with a smile. Or perhaps I'll whisper them into submission too. 3 months later, the first official Earth embassy opened on the Coalition's central world. Murphy, despite his protests and numerous attempts to be reassigned, had been appointed Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Coalition. This is punishment, isn't it? He muttered to Rodriguez as they prepared for the opening ceremony. The president calls it leveraging our assets, Rodriguez replied, adjusting Murphy's formal diplomatic attire, a uniform he wore with all the comfort of a straitjacket. You're the face of Earth now, like it or not. I don't like it, Murphy grumbled. I'm an anthropologist, not a politician. Which is exactly why you're perfect for this role, came a voice from behind them. Admiral Washington approached, looking almost approving. The galaxy doesn't need another smooth-talking diplomat. They need someone who understands cultural nuances and isn't afraid to use them. Murphy raised an eyebrow. Was that almost a compliment, Admiral? Don't get used to it, Washington replied, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Intelligence reports suggest 3 more species have requested diplomatic relations since word spread that you'd be the ambassador. Let me guess, all former victims of Vrix aggression. Washington nodded. The enemy of my enemy is still a potential problem, Murphy finished. But an interesting one. As they walked toward the ceremony, Murphy noticed a group of aliens hastily moving aside as he passed, their expressions ranging from awe to trepidation. They're still afraid of me, he observed quietly. Rodriguez shrugged. Better that than the alternative. Fear can become respect over time. Or hatred, Murphy countered. We need to be careful. Earth's reputation is balanced on a knife edge right now. The ceremony itself was mercifully brief. Politicians from a dozen species made flowery speeches about cooperation and new beginnings, carefully avoiding direct mentions of the Vrix incident. When Murphy's turn came to speak, a hush fell over the crowd. He stepped to the podium and looked out at the assembled representatives, beings of all shapes, sizes, and biological compositions, united only by their curiosity about Earth. As humans, he began, we have a saying, the devil is in the details. It means that challenges often hide in the small things we overlook. 3 months ago, the Vrix overlooked something about humanity, something fundamental to who we are. Murphy paused, watching as translators worked furiously to convey his words. We are contradictory beings. We fear the dark, yet we explore it. We dread the unknown, yet we seek it out. We tell stories about our nightmares, then laugh at them over breakfast. He smiled. Some might call this chaotic. We call it being human. He leaned slightly forward. Earth does not seek conquest. We do not want your worlds or resources. But make no mistake, we will defend ourselves, using whatever means necessary, be it advanced technology or a well-placed whisper. A murmur ran through the crowd. I look forward to learning about all your cultures, your hopes, your fears. Murphy's smile widened just a fraction. Especially your fears. Thank you. Mayor. As he stepped away from the podium, Rodriguez whispered, was threatening them really necessary? I didn't threaten anyone, Murphy replied innocently. I simply established parameters for our future relationships. Washington, who had overheard, shook his head but seemed almost amused. You just can't help yourself, can you? Consider it preventative diplomacy, Murphy said as they moved to the reception area where representatives from various worlds were already lining up to meet him. Better they know now what they're dealing with. As the first alien diplomat approached, a tall, feathered being from a system near the former Vrix territory, Murphy put on his best diplomatic smile. Ambassador Murphy, the alien said, inclining its crest respectfully. Your reputation precedes you. All good things, I hope? Murphy replied. The alien made a sound that might have been laughter. Let's just say your unconventional approach to the Vrix situation has caught the attention of many worlds, including mine. And how does your world view Earth now? The alien's feathers rippled in what Murphy recognized as a gesture of cautious optimism, as a potential ally against common threats, and perhaps with time as a friend. Murphy nodded slowly. Friendship requires understanding. Understanding requires honesty. He lowered his voice slightly. So let me be honest with you, Earth is new to this galactic community, but we're quick learners. We don't want trouble, but we're very, very good at ending it when it finds us. The alien diplomat studied him for a long moment, then extended a three-fingered hand. I believe we understand each other perfectly, Ambassador Murphy. As they shook hands, Murphy caught Rodriguez's eye across the room. She gave him a small nod of approval. Perhaps diplomacy wouldn't be so different from anthropology after all. Both required understanding what made other cultures tick, and occasionally, what made them run away. In the grand scheme of the galaxy, Earth was still just a small, blue world on the spiral arm of an unremarkable galaxy. But word was spreading throughout the stars, beware the humans. They know things they shouldn't. They see what others miss. And sometimes, when the situation calls for it, they whisper.